They needed to translate the formerly foreign teachings to the language the people spoke and understood. In this time, a few monks that were especially talented with learning and translating the Chinese language begun to emerge. To find the answer, we need to go back. Way back. To the time during the Han, Wei, Jin, Northern and Southern Dynasties period. The parts of China in Gansu, Xinjiang, and the large territory far to the east were referred to as Xiyu, which translates the Western regions. This wasn't just a direction. Areas further to the west were always referred to as unknown and mysterious lands by the Chinese natives then. And this belief was so strong that even as late as the Ming Dynasty, the journey to pick up Buddhism teaching scrolls from India was termed as the journey to the west, not just because of geographical direction, but to also emphasize that the monk took a journey to the unknown land. In some of the ancient poems that described the way people viewed the West, we can further understand how much mystery revolved around the West in the people's minds at that time. But we will get back to this part later. For now, let's go back to the Western Han Dynasty period to better understand how the people of China back then developed an interest in the previously despised and feared land of the West. During the Western Han Dynasty, there was a powerful state in the north called the Xiongnu state, and it frequently invaded the central plains where the Empire of China was at that time. It also controlled various states in the western regions. This made it even harder for the empire that was already very reluctant about going west to even consider building any meaningful connection with the people there. So for a long time, the two parties stayed disjoined. However, as the Xiongnu state grew in power, the emperor at that time decided that he would venture towards the west to seek an ally to fight them. And in order to unite with the Yuezhi kingdom in the western regions to jointly resist the Xiongnu, Emperor Wu of Han decided to send an envoy, where a young man Zhang Qian volunteered to lead this mission. Remember this name, because the whole story of China connecting with other states begun with this man. As you can imagine, going to the unknown West was not only challenging because it was unfamiliar territory, it was also dangerous because the soldiers from the Xiongnu state often scouted all the surrounding land. And Zhang Qian had to be very cautious with his movements. As you would imagine, of course, Zhang Qian is caught on the first attempt. He is taken to the territory of the Xiongnu state as a captive alongside all the people in his convoy. When the soldiers find out that he had been leading the emperor's convoy towards the west, they spare his life and rather decide to indoctrinate him and have him live among their people. This was not just a few months. He spent years living with them. Imagine, he even ended up marrying a lady given to him by the king of that land, and he had kids while there. At this point, it's only fair that we think this is how the story ends, right? But no. One day, after a whole 13 years, Zhang Qian escapes with his children and picked up straight from where he had ended. I guess they all thought he had probably quit the idea of going within the years he had been with them, so they let their guard down. So, Zhang Qian travels further to the west and finally gets to see the different cultures of the states in the western lands. He even gets to create relations with some of these states before getting to his final destination. Now, within the course of the years he spent as a captive, a lot had changed. The Yuezhi kingdom had moved further to the west, which meant they were no longer being attacked by Xiongnu armies. This was the reason why they refused to agree with the plan that Zhang Qian brought to their table. However, Zhang Qian still managed to establish mutual relations and exchange some cultural gifts. After this mission had been completed, Zhang Qian would return to his home, but not without hardships, as he got captured again by the Xiongnu state. However, this time, he didn't spend a long time there, and he finally managed to get back to see the emperor. The emperor was so happy to see Zhang Qian, who left as a young man and came back with all these different gifts and knowledge, as a grown person with a lot of experience. For this reason, He would later have the opportunity to return to the West under the emperor's command to build even more meaningful relations and have a better understanding of what the lands beyond home were like. And this is how the Silk Road trade began to develop. As China's imperial state opened up doors to the outside world, religions like Buddhism began to spread within the formerly non-religious empire. And this is where the very first learners of Chinese language emerged, a people teaching people to see hope beyond worldly suffering. Its influence grew as the Silk Road trade was also growing, to a point where many of the monks from the far lands were using the developing trade routes to move into the Chinese Empire. Through all this, the Empire of China had been open to receiving people from other cultural backgrounds, much to the point that during the reign of Emperor Ming of the Eastern Han Dynasty, 1st century AD, it was said that he once dreamt of a golden man at night, which the wise men of his empire at the time thought to be Buddhist monks. He then sent people to invite them over and built a Buddhist temple called Bema Temple. In many cases, the YouTube algorithm tends to favor entertainment videos over educational videos, but when you like and subscribe, you support me to be in a better position to provide useful material. Okay, back to our story timeline. The established Buddhist temples later became the first places of translating and learning of Chinese as a language, because they needed to translate the formerly foreign teachings to the language the people spoke and understood. In this time, a few monks that were especially talented with learning and translating the Chinese language began to emerge. For example, Kumarajiva was a renowned Buddhist scripture translator and eminent monk of the Eastern Qing dynasty. Born in the kingdom of Kucha, present-day Kuka area, Xinjiang, he was exceptionally intelligent from a young age, mastering Sanskrit and Buddhist scriptures. After overcoming numerous obstacles to reach Chang'an, he spearheaded a large-scale translation project. He abandoned the previously obscure method of interpreting Buddhist texts through analogy, adopting a more intuitive approach that suited Chinese readers, making the scriptures easier for the general public to understand. He translated over 300 volumes of Buddhist scriptures in his lifetime, including classics such as the Diamond Sutra and the Lotus Sutra, which have survived to this day. He is considered one of the most outstanding Buddhist scripture translators in ancient China. Some of the words he came up with have been kept and are still used to this very day. You should know, however, that the translation work they did during this period had its drawbacks. Most of the scrolls the monks were using were also translations of the original manuscripts, which meant some teachings had been diluted a lot. This is where the story of Xuanzang going to the West, which we mentioned earlier, came into play. Xuanzang, whose secular surname was Qian, lost both his parents at the age of 10 and entered the Buddhist order. After studying Buddhist scriptures, Xuanzang discovered many errors and decided to travel to India to obtain the true scriptures. It took him for years to reach India, where he visited numerous famous temples and studied Buddhism. More than 10 years later, Xuanzang returned to Chang'an with 657 Buddhist scriptures. He and his disciples busied themselves with propagating Buddhism while also translating Sanskrit classics. Over a period of 19 years, Xuanzang and his disciples translated 75 Buddhist scriptures in 1335 volumes. So besides Xuanzang, who traveled west, we also have Jianjin, who traveled east towards Japan. Jianjin was well-versed in Buddhist scriptures and medicine. During the reign of Emperor Xuanzang of Tang, the Japanese monk invited monks from China to go to Japan to spread Buddhism. Despite many refusing, arguing that it was a nearly impossible journey, Jianjin agreed because of a gift they gave him, which he deeply appreciated. They gave him a robe with the words, "Though mountains and rivers separate us, we share the same moon and sky." This gift made Jianjin decide to go with them on the journey to the east, despite the policy of the empire at that time not supporting people leaving for such causes. He ended up attempting 5 times, overcame numerous difficulties, before finally succeeding on the 6th attempt to cross the sea to Japan. His journey took a total of 12 years, during which 36 of his companions lost their lives. And he himself would end up blind by the time he reached Japan. So by this time, having people from different countries learning languages of other countries for diplomatic purposes had become a trend. According to statistics, the Tang Dynasty government received diplomatic envoys from over 70 countries, and its official educational institutions, such as the Imperial Academy and the National Academy, accommodated more than 30,000 foreign students. The Imperial Academy Guozijian of the Tang Dynasty was the highest educational administration institution and the highest institution of learning in the country, equivalent to a consortium of the Ministry of Education and top universities, and was the core place for cultivating talent. Its core functions were twofold. First, to manage national education and establish teaching systems and assessment standards. And second, it had to directly run and teach schools, overseeing 6 specialized schools: the Imperial Academy, the Imperial College, the Four Gates Academy, the Law Academy, the Calligraphy Academy, and the Mathematics Academy. Students mainly studied classics such as the Analects, Spring and Autumn Annals, Zhuozhuan, and I Ching. Students of the Imperial Academy were mostly children of officials or outstanding scholars. And after graduation, they could directly participate in the imperial examinations or enter officialdom. And among the brilliant scholars of the time was Sui Ziyuan. He traveled to Tang, China at the age of 12 with a merchant ship, obeying his father's command that he would not return until he passed the imperial examinations within 10 years. He passed the exams at 18, becoming one of the most outstanding students from Silla. At 28, he returned to Silla with the rank of a third-grade official in the Tang Dynasty and was highly regarded. He brought back a lot of Han Chinese cultural classics and institutional experience, introducing the Tang Dynasty's official document system and examination essays to Silla in his later years. He would end up founding academies to spread Confucianism and also writing books integrating Confucian, Buddhist, and Taoist thought. In making this video and studying the story timeline, I realized every single story here can be a video of its own. There was just so much detail in each that would make the video too long, so I decided I would just summarize the important points. However, if you guys want me to discuss the stories and events in detail, then let me know in the comments. So now we know that the learners of Chinese language were initially monks and traders, then the diplomats joined in on the fun. But if any documentation made this so clear for us, then it's definitely the Along the River during the Qing Ming Festival painting. This masterpiece by the Northern Song Dynasty painter Zhang Qian, measuring 24.8 centimeters in height and 528.7 centimeters in width, depicts the bustling scene of Bianjing, present-day Kaifeng, Henan Province, the capital of the Northern Song Dynasty. The painting features over 800 figures and more than 200 objects, with these numbers being open to scrutiny because the painting has some minor damages over time of its history, so the number could be more than that. The painting encompasses scenes of commercial streets, bridges, boats, tea houses, taverns, carriages, and pedestrians. From the expressions of vendors hawking their wares and the clothing of passers-by to the layout of river transport and the structure of urban buildings, everything is meticulously detailed, resembling a documentary of life from the Song Dynasty over 800 years ago. In brief, this is the time practical Chinese emerged. Classical Chinese alone couldn't cope up with these changes. Learning Chinese in this period was not just about knowing religious words, poems, and filial teachings anymore. People were learning it to hold conversations amongst each other. This fast change demanded a textbook that could show real-life conversations for foreigners to learn. Even though it dates back approximately 650 years, It laid a foundation for the style of textbooks for the Chinese language. It recorded the social life and political and economic conditions of China at that time. Let's look at a page from the book and see how big a change there is with the Chinese we speak today. Now, fast forward to the Ming and Qing dynasties. China begun to close off doors to the outside world. This illustration can help us better compare the time frames and see the significant changes that occurred in the Chinese education system. The extent of isolation of China as a state can be seen in some of the letters from emperors at that time writing to other countries. Writing to the royal family of England, Emperor Qianlong said, "The Celestial Empire is abundant in resources and has everything it needs. It has no need to rely on foreign goods to supplement its own." And another emperor named Jiaqing would later add, "The Celestial Empire is rich in the four seas. Why would it need the meager goods of such a small country?" Clearly undermining the might of the outside world. In this time frame, learning Chinese was not just discouraged, it became risky. 1. There was limited learning space as Chinese language learning was limited to business spoken language at the Guangzhou Foreign Business School, and foreign diplomats learned at the Consulate General. 2. Both Chinese people teaching Chinese and foreigners learning Chinese became underground activities, and participants would face severe penalties. This was because the imperial government at the time saw teaching Chinese as a way of giving away sensitive information and cultural mingling, which they considered a threat, I guess. This all meant that Chinese language education became limited to China. Now let's talk about that forced opening I mentioned earlier. The forced opening of China in the late Qing dynasty. After 1840 and 1840, the Qing dynasty and Britain engaged in the Opium War. After the Qing dynasty's defeat, the Treaty of Nanjing was signed in 1842, the first unequal treaty in modern Chinese history. It stipulated that the Qing dynasty would open Guangzhou, Xiamen, Fuzhou, Ningbo, and Shanghai as treaty ports, allowing foreigners to reside and conduct business in these places. Later, through other treaties, more ports were opened, and foreigners also gained the right to missionary work and establish schools in the interior of China. In fact, historically speaking, Christianity entered China 3 times. Nestorianism in the Tang dynasty, Christianity in the Yuan dynasty, and Christianity in the late Ming dynasty. The third entry being the most successful in handling the relationship between Chinese and Christian cultures. These missionaries like Luo Mingjian, who founded the Jingyan School in Macau and co-edited the first Chinese foreign dictionary in 1583 with Matteo Ricci, who himself compiled complete map of the world, introducing the Ming dynasty people to the global landscape, and added scientific words like dot and line, which are still used to this day in Chinese language. Despite Christianity not growing in popularity due to cultural and political reasons, the missionaries' work would not go in vain, as the connection between China and the outside world would only develop more from there. Among the dominant figures pioneering this change were also Morrison, the first professional Chinese teacher in Europe, Huang Jiaoyu, Fast forward to the Republic of China, 1912 to 1949. The feudal rule of the emperor is gone, and a new society is forming. Among the masses, cultural intertwining is very evident. The old society life alongside the emerging new culture and lifestyle. And the education system itself also saw changes of its own. The imperial examination system was abolished, modern schools became widespread, students no longer needed to memorize the 4 books and 5 classics, and girls could also attend school. Young people began to discuss democracy and science, advocating for gender equality and free love. In addition to traditional Peking opera and crosstalk, cinemas, dance halls, and cafes appeared. And then came the language revolution of modern Chinese, the vernacular movement. It was during this time that the scholar Lao She gained fame for his work as a Chinese teacher. Lao She, whose real name was Zhang Qian, was born in Beijing and was a renowned modern Chinese writer and playwright. Growing up in Beijing's hutongs, he had a deep understanding of the everyday life, customs, and mentality of the city's residents. In his literary works, Lao She distinguished himself with a unique Beijing flavor. He skillfully used refined Beijing colloquialisms in his narratives. November 14, 2025. It is the World Chinese Language Day, and celebrations are all over the country, especially among foreign students. The big event, however, is held in Beijing at the International Conference Center. People then begin to mumble. Chinese is emerging as a new global language. I for one believe that, just as English united the world before the industrial age, fueling globalization and merging different cultures together through trade, Chinese is doing that today, and at an even faster pace, thanks to the internet.